Hi, everyone. Welcome to the final presenter in the Ethics of Digital Literacy webinar series hosted by Drew Teach in the spring of 2020. Today, we have with us Lauren King, who is going to be talking to us about the ethical imperative of teaching digital literacy. Lauren, would you like to introduce yourself and share your experience with us?
Sure. My name is Lauren King, and I'm an adjunct professor at Drew University in the Casperson School of Graduate Studies and at Union County College in New Jersey, where I teach developmental reading and writing. My K through 12 background was in New York City public schools, where I taught middle school and predominantly high school. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is reflecting on the work in those schools in New York City, as well as the work that's happening right now with my community college students. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen. All right. Great, and I love this because I can see all of you as well. So as Kristen said, I'm sharing a little bit from the chapter that she and I wrote for the ethics of digital literacy, and I'm talking about access, readiness, and the ethical imperative of advocacy. So what I want us to think about right now is, what does it mean to be college and career ready in your classroom? And so that's pre-K through 12th grade. To you, what does it mean for your students to be college and career ready?
Can anyone just go ahead and answer?
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Julia. I don't think we've very formally met before, but I teach in the theater arts classroom. And so to be college and career ready is different in the theater arts community than it is in the many general education setting community. I think to be career ready, theater arts means you have been provided the skills you need to be strong communicators, to be creative thinkers, to be able to create and design on your own, and you know the fundamentals of performance. That said, to be college ready, if you're going for your degree in musical theater or for acting or directing, you need to start in it's a totally different vein. You need to have an audition book prepared. You need to have monologues in your back pocket. You need to have skills as a self-tape artist, as in picking up quick choreography. So for me, my kids who are looking to be college ready for theater, those are the kids where I'm like, okay, we started at the top of the year and we're like, let's get audition books ready, let's go. Whereas my kids who I know are like, I just want to do it for fun. I was like, cool, let's work on your communication. Let's work on your creativity skills so you can apply for those art scholarships and stuff like that. Or you can use, in the future, you can say when you're applying for work, yeah, I was in theater arts, speech and debate team. So I feel that I have really strong skills as an orator for your law school prep and stuff like that.
Julia, I'm so happy you went first, because you literally hit on all of the skills that I believe students need to be college and career ready across the board. So theater arts through kindergarten. So thinking about that idea of long-term preparation and then having a portfolio of work at the end of it, that's across content areas. Having the skills to be a strong communicator, absolutely. Being able to speak well, to write well, to communicate with anyone. I heard you mention problem solving. Mm-hmm. I think that these are all skills that we can agree. I feel like you were a plant, but you weren't. So wow. That we can all agree are the skills that we're looking for our students. Does anybody have anything else that they'd like to add to that list?
I was going to throw in, oh wait, did someone else jump in?
No, okay. Go ahead, Jessie.
Throw in that, at least for me, with history, not that it's not important to know when the Revolutionary War started or when we signed the Constitution, it is, but to me, I think one of the most important skills that they should take to college in their life is critical consumption and critical thinking, critical reading, things that are not just read this, put this, read this, do this. It's thinking and working with things.
Thank you. Yeah, critical, being able to critically consume, think, absolutely. Those are on that list. And and sometimes I fit that in with the idea of being creative. So being able to look at something and to be able to think critically, to problem solve, and to come up with a creative solution. So that fits right in. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else have something that they'd like to add that wasn't included?
I wanted to add that I think about my ESL students a lot, and I think about the term college and career ready a lot because they're coming in so behind, and I'm just constantly thinking like, oh man, like the clock is ticking, like this, public education is going to end at a certain point. And I think, one of the things that I hope for them is that they have opportunity. Obviously, we all hope that, but I guess what I want for them is the ability to have flexibility. Like they can do this job, they can do that job, they can kind of jump around. Like that, we talk about that a lot, like as the value of a liberal arts education is that you have the skills, not necessarily one specific discipline. And I think that kind of goes to Jesse's point of being able to think critically and be given whatever kind of job. I'm sure we all have worked a million different types of jobs. And I hope that that's one of the skills that they walk out with, is that they can kind of juggle if they need to, because sometimes we do need to in life. Life happens, coronavirus happens, and you might need to juggle a job that you weren't necessarily trained for. So that would be what I hope they leave with.
Glenna, that is the perfect segue for where I am going right now. So thank you. I agree. And I am really excited because I feel like in the chat, which I cannot see, there are things coming up. So I'm excited to get to those as well. I usually jump right into why I did this work and what sparked me. And for me, when I was teaching 10th grade, we had a lot of discussions about what it meant to be college and career ready, what it meant to be rigorous. And I will get to that because that really shifted my mindset. And I began to think about, okay, what are the skills that I used when I was in college? And I hadn't been in college that long ago at the time. And I thought about what my college classrooms looked like. And I thought about what my career communication and problem solving looked like. And I realized that that wasn't necessarily happening in my classroom. Yet I was claiming that I was preparing my students to be college and career ready. And the reason that this wasn't happening in my classroom was because I was in a classroom where we had no access to the digital tools that were so integral to my day-to-day as an employee and had been so integral to my day-to-day as a student when I was in college. And so as I was thinking about my own students, I thought, well, they're not exactly going to be doing this work. And so I shifted the way that I did little things in my classroom. And so when Kristen and I wrote this chapter, I was really excited. I'm like, this makes sense for right now. And then the COVID crisis happened. And immediately, as everyone pivoted and teachers so quickly and so amazingly and with such grace changed everything they were doing to be virtual, I thought to myself, I'm like, this is it. This is going to change everything. And then my next thought was, Kristen and I need to update what we wrote because everything's different now. And then I realized it's not. And I realized that these two quotes that I start with are happening for teachers and at the same time are not. So I always like to start this type of conversation with my two favorite quotes from the first is from Shalane Flanagan, who's a marathoner, and she says that you need to get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, which is like a really great life lesson. It's a great truth to marathoning, but it's also a great truth to teaching. Like, if you are going to be innovative, if you are going to do the things you need to for your students, you're going to feel uncomfortable, and you need to be comfortable with that. And then Marian Wright Edelman at NCTE years ago spoke, and in her keynote she said, we must love our children more than we love our comfort zones. And that really resonates with me because I always think about what it means to be a teacher. And oftentimes we think about being the expert in the room. We think that we don't want to mess up in front of our students, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything possible right for them because we have such a limited amount of time, and then they're moving on. And we get the next batch of students, and we're hoping that as they move out of our classroom and into whatever the next step is, that we have prepared them. And so we want to make sure that we're not wasting time by doing things that we're not fully sure of or that we're not full experts in. And so as schools around the country completely pivoted outside of their comfort zones, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm not going to need to use this slide anymore because teachers are doing it, and they are, and it's amazing. We're all completely shifting for the good of our students. But at the same time, the tenets of what our students need in terms of digital literacies hasn't changed. And what we need to be doing when we get back into our classroom hasn't changed either. And the advocacy that we need to provide for our students hasn't gone away. In fact, if anything, the juxtaposition of the students who have the skills, who have access, who have the devices, is really shining in terms of the inequity that's happening. And so as I reflect further, I realize that this work is just as important, if not even more important, as we're dealing with this crisis. So when I'm thinking about the COVID crisis and I'm thinking about equity of access, there was an article that Kristen sent me this morning by my favorite educational beat journalist, all-around journalist, Nicole Hannah-Jones. And on the next slide, I'll show you some of the pieces from that article that really stuck out to me. But the glaring inequity between the haves and the have-nots is showing right now, and it's showing up in terms of who is showing up for class, in terms of who is able to complete work, in terms of who is not getting booted offline when they're trying to have a conversation with their class once they get online. And so thinking about that, we're realizing that the internet isn't a public utility, and we're expecting all of our students to get online, even though a lot of them might not have that ability to get online. And so the shift needs to be that advocating for the internet as a public utility, especially as public schools move online. Also, thinking about what our students need emotionally prior to what they might need academically, and how are we balancing that in the meantime. And as I said before, this pivot to online has been so admirable. I scroll through my teacher Twitter, I talk to my colleagues, and it's amazing what teachers can do in no time at all. And I'm even looking at some of my colleagues at Union County who have been teaching for 30 years. Some of them don't even have computers and have completely shifted online. But because we have moved what was happening in our classroom to a computer, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're teaching into those skills and those digital literacies that students need. And so with that in mind, I just wanted to pull up, so I've linked the article here, and I can put it in the chat after as well. As school moves online, many students stay logged off. And I love so many things about this article. I love the voice that is given to people who are typically voiceless in these situations. And I also love that a school that I worked for is cited in this article, and that the student is advocating for herself. And so this student talks about the fact that she still needs her teachers, and she still needs to be in a classroom. And she also talks about the difficulty of trying to complete these assignments on a cell phone, and how impossible that can be when everything that she does has shifted online. And I also included this contrast in the last paragraph, where schools in affluent districts are noticing 100% participation and attendance from students. And this is mind-blowing to me, because as I have shifted my class online, I'm noticing like 30% attendance. And I'm noticing that a lot of my students are actually working on these frontline jobs as grocery stores, as delivery people. And what are the expectations of students across the board when they're supposed to be on an even playing field? And what are we telling students when we're saying, you need to get online, you need to do this work, and we're not necessarily identifying the trauma or the outside forces that are impacting them. And so I wanted to address these things first, because I felt like it's the elephant in the room, but also just because everything has shifted online doesn't necessarily mean that the skills that we need to impart and the advocacy goes away. And so as we move on, I just wanted to keep that in the back of our heads. So back when I started doing this work, the big buzzword was rigor, and everything needs to be more rigorous. And we have to make sure that the work that we're doing is rigorous and college ready, and our students are going to leave here with everything they need. And so this is my favorite meme from Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride. And this meme kept going through my head as I sat through faculty meetings and DOE meetings. Like, you keep using this word, but I don't think it means what you think it means. And this was especially as I would hear people who were in the same meetings getting the same directives being like, okay, I'm gonna take my 5-page paper and I'm going to make it a 10-page paper. I'm like, no. This isn't what we mean by that. But I also couldn't really synthesize for myself what rigor meant and what was rigorous. And that's when I did that reflection of, okay, I went to college, I have a career. What are the skills that I needed in order to be successful in both? And I went and I thought about the fact that never in college had I received a worksheet from my professors. Never in college had I not reached out to a professor via email. Never had I been, as a student, given a workshop on how to use a new tool or platform. And so as I was thinking about these things, I thought about how I could include that into my classroom. How can I include these skills? And this was really, really scary for me, because as I've been saying for the past, I guess we've been doing this for 10 years, I am not a computer person, as you can see by my very basic slides. I like using the internet to like read recaps of my favorite television show and to go on Twitter and get really incensed about things. But asking to create something online, asking to kind of be an expert about something technology related was scary for me. And especially because I was working at the time in a school that didn't really have a lot of access to things. That we had a computer lab, but half of the computers worked and somebody was always in there. And so the idea of kind of jumping in feet first with nothing freaked me out a lot. So when I parsed it down, I came down to like 4 or 5 essential skills. And that really helped me to identify what my students needed and how I could provide these things for them. So the essential skills that my students needed, and this is what we talked about in the beginning, the idea of communication. How do I send a professional email? How do I communicate in such a way that if there was a screenshot of it and it was posted on my resume, I would feel proud of it? How could I teach my students to navigate new platforms? Because we used Google we were a Google email based school. And so what happens if they went to a Microsoft school for college? Nobody was going to provide them a workshop on how to use Microsoft. So I wanted to teach them how to problem solve in terms of tools, in terms of platforms. I wanted them to problem solve. I wanted to be able to say, I don't know. How can we figure this out together? And finally, I wanted to level the playing field. Like I said, I was teaching in New York City, but I knew that a lot of the schools where my students were applying, they were going to be going to school with kids who went to different schools, who came from more affluent districts. And so I really thought about, okay, I have Title I students and they're going to be going to college. They're going to be sitting in college classes with students who have been in one-to-one districts their entire lives. And how can they be expected to have those same skills when they're sitting in a classroom together if I'm not providing that for them? And so I really, at that moment, realized, like, this isn't a luxury anymore. Like, we keep talking about, at the time we kept talking about the 21st century literacies, but like, we were a decade into the 21st century at that point. Like, this isn't a fun extra anymore. This is a literacy that is a right for our students, and something that as a teacher, I am obligated to teach them. I am obligated to include in my curriculum, in my classroom. So I have these obligations. I have this imperative to teach, but we didn't have a lot of access at the time. We had a ban on cell phones, but I did have an administrator who was willing to listen. And even if you feel like you have an administrator who might not be willing to listen, I'm going to give you some tips on how you can present a case to any administrator to make sure that your students' needs are met. So when I'm talking about a ban on cell phones, at the time, New York City did not allow for cell phones in classrooms or in school buildings. And this has since changed. But my students came through the scanning, the metal detectors in the morning. They could not have a phone on them. And they left them at the bodega across the street for $1, and then they picked them up at the end of the day. So even as I would hear colleagues in other schools say, like, well, I have them leave their cell phone face down on their desk, and when we're ready to use it, they flip it over. I'm like, that would be awesome, but I can't do that. What do I do? So I created a plan. And when I went to my principal, I had a plan for why this was important. I provided him with the skills that were going to be gained by my students completing this work. And I'm going to get to like what this work looked like in a second. And I connected it to the standards. So for me, when I started to think about how can I integrate technology into my classroom in a way that is effective, in a way that is building the skills that are needed, I changed my traditional argument writing essay to a public service announcement video. And I was like, we can do this. And so I shifted, instead of writing this essay, they're going to write me a rationale explaining the choices they made in this video. And I'm going to get cell phones in school. How am I going to do this? And so when I went to my boss, I said, okay, I want to do this thing. I know we're not allowed to do this thing, but can I provide you with the research, and can I provide you with a plan that explains how this is going to work without breaking any of the school rules? And then will you get back to me? He's like, sure. So I went in and I said, here's my argument unit. Here are the standards that typically are met with our final argument paper. Here's the new project I want to do. Here are the standards that are going to be met by this project. Additionally, here are the college and career ready skills that our students need through technology in order to truly be college and career ready, like we've been talking about the whole year. and I need them to bring cell phones in. So he was like, okay, that like sounds good, sounds good. And then like when I said the cell phone thing, I felt like there could have been a record scratch and a stop. And I said, okay, so here's what I want to do. I want to wait downstairs at scanning. I'm going to have one person from every group show up with their cell phone. If they are late or if they don't show up, then their group doesn't get to film that day. And I'm going to collect the cell phones. I'm going to hold on to them. I'm going to lock them in my closet, and they cannot have them until they are doing the work in our class. We are only filming one day for 40 minutes. That's it. And he let me do it. And so I told my students, and they were like, we get to bring phones into school. This feels really good. We never get to do it. They decided who from each group was going to bring a phone in. And the morning of filming, I waited downstairs as kids who had never been on time to my 5th period class rolled up to school 20 minutes early and handed me their cell phone because they felt really proud. They were included. They felt a part of this community. And so everybody's work was completed. There was not a single issue. No one filmed anyone inappropriately. No one took inappropriate photos. No one fought me when I was like, okay, time to give me your phone back to store it in my closet, watch me lock it. And so it was this really magical moment in terms of the skills that they were working on, in terms of the academic work that they were doing, in terms of the rigor, but also in terms of the community and what we could accomplish together. And so I think that really shifted for me the idea that I always knew my kids could be trusted. I always knew that they were able to complete this kind of work, but it kind of showed everyone else like, hey, look what we can accomplish together. And I do think when going into something that feels a little bit different, that is outside of the realm of what is traditional, connecting it to the standards makes this type of work so much more, I don't want to say the word palatable, but that's the word that's coming to my brain for supervisors and for administrators and for the people who you are going to and asking them to bend these rules so that the rules can totally change for everyone else. Because that's what happens once they see what can happen, the possibilities become endless. Okay, so outside of Kristen Turner, who was also one of my professors in graduate school, I had another favorite professor who used to always say this phrase. She would say, I'm a teacher, but I'm not a control freak. And at the time, I didn't understand what that meant. And then I became a teacher and I'd be like, oh, Sid, yes, okay. So in terms of being a control freak as a teacher, we don't like to be unprepared. No one wants to stand in front of a room and get the hot sweats and be like, I don't know what's happening, or that feeling when the internet drops out or when everything you've planned kind of just falls apart. It's scary not to be the expert. And this is where we come back to that feeling of being comfortable with uncomfortable. This is what's happening now. People are uncomfortable. Teachers are uncomfortable and they're rising to the occasion for their students. And so when we're thinking about what is required of our students and what skills that they need in order to move on to the next level, we need to be okay with not being the expert. We need to be okay with saying, I'm the English lit expert. I am the Spanish expert. I am the theater expert. I am the algebra expert. I'm not a computer teacher, unless you're Sean Spaventa, who's on here, who's our IT, University of Technology. Most of us are not. And so it's okay. I put up these guys. I had a lot of students. I had a lot of ESL students, and I had a lot of students with disabilities in my classes. And this was their time to shine, because these were the areas where a lot of them had expertise. So I asked my students to edit videos. I had never edited a video in my life. I didn't know what to do, but we did it together. And so I said, okay, we filmed, and now we're going to edit our videos. And I had the first hand shoot up, and he was like, Miss, I don't know how to edit. And I was like, I don't either. But I had another student turn and say, yeah, but I do. And then the two of them got together and they edited a video together, and I had no idea that that student had this expertise. And so they taught me, and it was awesome because after that, their self-efficacy in my class rose exponentially because they felt like they had a place. They got to feel for the first time what it felt like to hold the power, to have knowledge, and that really changed everything. It really did help to build our community. And so it is scary. It is scary to relinquish that control, but the benefits of it are tenfold, come back to you all the way. So again, we're not computer experts, but if we are thinking about college and career preparation in all of our classes, then we really need to be thinking about the basic skills of digital literacies, and we need to be thinking about how we can do creative and collaborative work. And so I'm experiencing this right now in the course that I'm teaching, my developmental English class. And with that, I'm noticing that there are students who have had this type of literacy building, and there are students who I can tell did not get that while they were in high school. And so, sorry. So it's interesting, even just the ability, I put a Flipgrid up, and I said, your job for the next class is just to figure out how to use this and how to send me a video. And I had some students who were able to do it right away, and I had some students who were like, I have no idea what to do. We're able to send like a really thoughtful email asking for help, and I could tell like who had gotten that education, had gotten that skill building, and who had not. And so it's just another level of what kids are able to bring to your classroom that is interesting for me to see from the next step up, right? Because they're in college, and who has this college ready skill, who has this career ready skill, and who does not. And to me, that skill that they're missing is just as important as the students who are missing certain critical reading skills and who are missing certain writing skills. And so this is actually something that we are working on now. Like, all right, how do we send an email? How do we send a professional email? How do we navigate these new platforms that we maybe haven't used before? How do we show up to a Zoom meeting together and not lay in our bed with our covers up to our face? How do we do these things? Because they matter. These are skills that matter. And finally, I just want to touch on this idea of being tool agnostic. Right here, you see there's actually a list of tools that my students came up with. I want to say in like 2014, 2015, when we met back together. I said, okay, let's share all of the editing tools that we are coming up with. And this is what my students came up with. I did not add a single one because I don't have those skills. Obviously, I've heard of Adobe. Obviously, I've heard of Movie Maker. I've heard of iMovie. But they were coming up with these awesome tools that the next year, some of them didn't exist. And so it really forced me to think about the idea of being tool agnostic. If we are building the skills for our students, if we're helping our students to build these skills, to build these problem solving skills, to build these synthesis skills as they read online, as they navigate new tools, then we are building the necessary skills. If we are telling them, this is how you use iMovie, this is how you edit on iMovie, we're doing a disservice, because when they go to their next teacher, they go to their next level, they may not have access to iMovie. They may not have access to Pear Deck or to Flipgrid or to whatever the hot tool of the moment is. But instead, if we're teaching them how to navigate those platforms, then it's the whole idea of teach a man to fish. Like, we are teaching them how to fish when instead of giving them the fish. And that's always my frustration when I hear from some of my colleagues. They're like, oh, I went to this awesome workshop on how to use Pinterest. I went to this awesome workshop on how to use Pear Deck. And I'm like, why? Like, what is it? What happens if Pear Deck goes away in a year or goes behind a paywall? I think about Wikispaces, rest in peace. Like, we loved Wikispaces and it doesn't exist anymore. And so much of our work was housed in this place that's gone. And that's the nature of the internet. Things go away. Tools go behind paywalls. Our favorite website can go behind paywalls. I look at Padlet. Padlet used to be free and now you get 10 a year. So what's something else I can use to achieve the same goal? If I'm looking for a back channel, what's a new back channel I can use now that Today's Meet doesn't exist anymore? And so that's the idea of being flexible as a teacher and allowing ourselves not to be the expert in one given thing. Because these 21st century tools, these 21st century literacies change. The skills do not, the literacies themselves do not, but how we use them and the methods in which we are able to demonstrate them do. And so that's the importance of that crowdsourcing. That's the importance of collaborating, of working together, because it helps to continue the skill instead of whatever's hot at the moment. I feel like I just talked for a really long time. And so I want to hear from some of you, like, what's going on in the chat? Should I get out of my screen share, Kristen, to get into the chat?
We've been having a very nice conversation in the chat, not all thoughtful, some, comedic, which is great because we need that. The idea that tools are just tools and go away is kind of what we're focusing on now. But I don't know, does anybody else have a question or a comment for Lauren?
I mean, I wrote this in the chat box, but what you're saying is, like, it's so opposite of the way my school is approaching this problem, because they are thinking, like, no, fewer tools, fewer programs, because we're going to overwhelm the kids and, everything's going to blow up, right? But I think we're underestimating the kids, and it feels very punitive to be like, no, you can't use Google Classroom anymore because we have this other learning management system, and you can't use this, and you have to, and it's mostly the parents that are, like, trying to step in and help their kids figure it out. And the parents are getting frustrated because they don't have the skills. But I think the kids are more flexible than we're giving them credit for. And they like using different tools. It's novel. It's interesting, and they feel really proud when they, figure something out. So I'm having all kinds of ideas to go back to my boss with here. Thank you.
Charlotte, just real quick, is this right now in the new crisis that they're telling you can't, or has this always been the case?
Well, I feel that my school has been very behind on a lot of tech things, even though it's very affluent and it's an independent school. I think that people have sort of stuck with very traditional, comfortable methods. And now people are being forced to be more creative. And so they're trying to use more tools, but it could also be that the kids haven't developed those skills yet to approach different tools with flexibility. So, I mean, we haven't set them up very well. So yeah, but it feels stifling to now be told, like, go be creative and do an awesome job so that kids stay enrolled in our school. But wait, you can't use this and you can't use that because it's overwhelming. So it's kind of like I'm between a rock and a hard place.
You are. And I feel like that problem, with the exception of like worrying about enrollment, is something that a lot of teachers are facing. And I on one hand agree, like now is probably not the best time to be like, let's try all of these new things, but instead thinking about, okay, when things, and this is actually my last slide, like when things get back to normal, how can I do this so that if something ever happens again, they have the skills for this, but also just in life in general, they have these skills. So interesting. Thank you.
My school is having a very similar thing. I think on Thursday or Friday last week, we had a Zoom PD, and it was, if you're going to do this, use this. If you want this, use this. If you do this, you do this. It was there's going to be no flexibility. We originally started with a lot of different ideas of what teaching and learning was going to look like. And it became, all right, we need to bring this in. And I don't know how that's going to work for everybody. It was a lot, again, of parents going like, I have too many kids going in too many different directions, which is true. Mm-hmm. You have 3 kids in 3 different schools and they all use 3 different platforms. You're going to lose your mind. But it was very like jarring to be like, okay, I have to change everything that I already did in my classroom to be unfamiliar. And I've had kids use TikToks and now we have to use this, and it's different.
And it's really interesting too, because you're saying that you've already done these things. And so like, it almost feels counterintuitive to then change what you've already been doing prior to this crisis just to fit certain needs. But then again, I wonder if your students feel the same way and are feeling the same frustrations that you're feeling and that your colleagues are feeling, or if they're just like, oh, I got this. I know how to use it. So I'm curious to know how your students feel too.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Currently, we're on spring break. Most of them are feeling like they want to lay in their beds for a week.
Fair.
We're picking up an on-course classroom completely starting after break. So we'll see how they actually do with that.
Well, hopefully they have these skills already that they'll be able to navigate a new platform and teach their parents.
Yeah.
I can't see the chat, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Is that okay? Because I want to actually see what you you have to say. Actually, no. Here's what we're going to do. I want us to think about the future, this glorious future when we are back in our classrooms and we are face-to-face with students. And I want you to think about how your instruction is going to change when you return to your classroom. What's going to be different for you? What are the skills that you might teach into for your students? What is now going to be included in your curriculum that maybe hadn't been before? So how is your instruction going to change? And I'm actually going to stop sharing so I can see everybody.
I think for me, I'm going to try and build backroads for myself into allowing students to use more video-based technology for doing scene work and for doing monologues and stuff like that. It has been difficult because we were in a scene performance unit or about to approach it right before this happened. And we put it off, and we're at the point where we can't put it off. They have to do it. And we also have our advanced acting students doing director's showcase where they are directing full-length shows and they're using Zoom to do it. So admitting like backroads for that just emergency situations where like maybe someone's really sick and we can find a way to incorporate them more into my instruction or into rehearsals, and also finding ways to incorporate technology like that directly into class. For example, like my CT and I have decided to change Director's Showcase into a radio show. So they're doing all of their performances as radio shows. And it's just like finding ways to kind of like interweave these opportunities that will then allow students who maybe are out because they're sick due to 504s or something else to be more involved. Because we definitely were a little thrown for a loop at first about like, how are we going to do these classes without being with them? It's such an in-person experience. And so I'm definitely going to try to find ways to like keep this involved so that if something ever did happen again, one, it wouldn't be such a shift, but two, to incorporate more people and to give them more access to each other if they can't be in the room itself.
I think one thing that I would, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll go after you.
Are you sure? Okay.
Sure.
I think one thing that I will for sure change, and this is something I kind of wanted to do for a while, is just maybe in the beginning of the year or a couple times throughout have like study skill type check-ins, because I think I don't know for sure, but I'm fairly certain that this is accurate based on what I've heard from my CT. A lot of our students, they don't know how to kind of set up a self-discipline for themselves. And I don't mean to put it all on them, because this is obviously a very weird time. But you know, I think about my own education, like I had the benefit of having a mom who's a teacher. So when I came home from school, it was very clear. It was snack, homework, and there was a structure to it, you know, and I built that for myself. And so in college, I kind of had that discipline already built in. And I know that some of my students' parents, you know, they're working really late or, you know, whatever, they're not home as much perhaps. So building in maybe like a little mini unit, maybe in the beginning of the year and the end of the year or midway, about what can you do? You know, if you don't have a quiet space, can you listen to music? What kind of supports can you give yourself, even if the situation is not ideal, so that you can continue your education, you can get what you deserve out of this?
Glenna, that makes me think of, I had a lot of students who had really long commutes and they refused to read on the subway, even though I showed them the Instagram account, Hot Guys Reading on the Subway. And I'd be like, look, this could be you. You could be on this page. And it didn't help. But there was a lot of open access ebooks, especially the books that we had access to. And I was like, look, here's how you can read this book for free on your cell phone on your commute, because you looked so much cooler scrolling through your phone than reading a book on the train. And so I think that is an important skill that they need to know, like, what are the resources out there for them. So that would be great.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to add that in New York City, so we are required right now to have video conferences or live teaching with students. So I really like that. And I would like to, continue that after we go back to school, just because it provides a way for me to check in with students and clarify any assignments. And I can see that a lot of kids feel comfortable doing that. So that's something I wish that the DOE, continues, at least like maybe on the weekend or after school. What else? Yeah, so like for me, the transition of remote learning hasn't been that tough, just because I have been doing it in my classes. And I agree with you with being flexible and not be afraid of using tech tools. And it's a struggle to use them at the beginning, but we get used to them over time. And we just build that of like being flexible. Okay, we're gonna make mistakes, but we're gonna grow on this eventually. I know that my colleagues, especially older generations, they are feeling frustrated just because they have been pushed to learn everything at once, remote learning. So they are feeling frustrated. But the DOE has been providing a lot of learning opportunities where they can use Google Classroom, they can use Microsoft apps, they can use different tools to support their students. So it's the resources are there, but it's just tough on some people.
Yeah, I think you are such a great example of someone who, like, this was no big shift for you because of all the work that I know you've been doing with your students over the last few years. So I feel really grateful for your students that they have that, so that it is as seamless as possible for them, while still recognizing that there's probably a lot of emotional stuff going on there, and a lot of students are home with a lot of people. And so that I'm dealing with some similar things right now with, like, how do we navigate? We know how to do this work. We've been doing it. How can we do it when our situations have changed, when our work situations have changed, when all of your siblings are home from college and you're trying to share like 2 computers or 1 computer? And so because you've already built in the basic skills that they need, then there's a little bit more flexibility to help them navigate the harder stuff that has come up through the crisis.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another point. Like, I wish cities or district, provide funding to provide equipment like iPads or computers to students that are, come from challenging households. I know my niece was going to school in New Jersey, and the school would give her a computer. She wouldn't even use it, but hopefully.
And that's been a really big point that's been in the news lately, is like, oh, we're giving students devices, and this is like across the country, but it's one thing to have a device and it's another thing to be able to be connected. And so something that I've been trying to do is, okay, what are assignments that my students can do if they have limited connectivity? I most of the time have limited connectivity. Oh, Kristen just said, or have instruction that is connected. Yes. And so thinking about that, like, how can we ensure that our instruction is connected? How can we ensure that no matter when our students are able to access the material, that they are getting the same benefits as students who are able to be there face to face at the all together? So that synchronous versus asynchronous work. What else? How else is, I'm like trying to listen to everybody, but also read the chats at the same time. And I'm just seeing really interesting things about what's going to happen next year. And so I want to hear them. What else?
One thing I'm looking forward to, sorry, Kelly, you're next, is that I've seen a lot of very rigid teachers realize they have to bend for their students' needs, and not just technologically, but their social emotional needs. I have students who their parents have coronavirus, and they're like, I'll try to get my work done. I'm like, don't get your work done. Go be with your parents. The work can wait. You work with what you have right now. And a lot of really hard teachers realizing that it's not worth the fight. They just have to realize they have to give a little more to the students.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, we are, I keep seeing this phrase pop up. We are not working from home. We are home trying to work. And I keep giving that same grace to my students too, especially like hearing from them. But then some of them I'm not hearing from, and I'm trying and going through and just giving them that same grace that I'm giving the students who are able to give me an email, who have the capability emotionally or connectively to respond. And so I think it's really important that you're recognizing that, because as teachers, like, we're more than just like the hard, strict people. Like, we are caring for people. We are caring for other people's kids. Like, we need to be able to give them what they need at this time. And so I'm like seeing Kristen too is talking about how important pre-assessment is going to be next year, because it's not that we're going to be able to start our years the status quo of like, I always start with this unit, so I'm going to start with this unit. We might need to give them extra and additional support. We're definitely going to have to give them additional support. And so that's our job. It's not the job of the student to be kept back because of what they're missing. It's our job to be flexible and to shift around what we've been doing. Kelly, I know that you had your hand up. Not hand up, but
Yeah, I just mean, at least personally, I think I'll probably shift to more of a blended learning model in the future because I can see how much students can do, especially if I continue at a school where I know that they have access and they have resources. Um, because I feel like currently my teaching, a lot of times before the distance learning, we would spend time reading an article together in class, and then if they didn't finish their work for the day, they would do it at home where they don't have my support. But I've seen so much through the distance learning that I should be doing the reading, like the students should be doing the reading at home on their own and then spend more time with me in class where we can analyze class questions together or work on more projects because they are clearly responsible enough to be doing the reading on their own. They're doing a great job with it right now. So I think that's personally how my teaching will shift because of this.
So what you're talking about is like that flipped model. And I think even if you feel like, oh, my students might not be connected, survey them. And I talk about this all the time. Kristen and Troy came into my classroom when I was in a Title I school. I was like, none of my students have access to anything. They had told me they didn't have access. And when they surveyed students, they found out that everyone had access to something. And whether that was a cell phone or a shared computer, there was still access. And so asking them what they have and then planning your flip or your blend from that can work anywhere. And that's part of that advocacy. That's part of that idea that I can create a video and you can watch this video at home, and then we're going to talk about it in class and how you're going to disseminate information. Thanks. Yes, use face-to-face time for digging in.
So I was just thinking, just to kind of pick up where you left off, that we have some students who are not engaging at all for a number of reasons. And, we make sure that every student, when they left school before it was closed, had some kind of technology, and we have an AP who's also delivering technology to students who don't have it. But for whatever reason, they're still not engaging, right? But then we also have this other faction of students who are totally checked out in school or are chronically absent who are 100% engaged. And so I think it's worth having some of them have anxiety, like they have, anxiety, and they can't, some of them can't even leave their house. And it's like, I think it's definitely worth having a conversation next year about what we learned this year about how we can get kids engaged, even if they're not in school, like ways that we can leverage technology to engage the students who are typically disengaged in school or who are chronically absent. Because I think like we're learning important lessons now about, just because the kid is not doing what they need to be doing or what we want them to be doing in school, it doesn't mean we can't engage them. There are ways. And if nothing else, that's something we've definitely learned, I think, just in the last couple of weeks.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it almost is becoming another way to differentiate for our students. And so I think that this is showing from this crisis, like there are really good things that are coming out of this in terms of like the changes in the education world. And so the idea that learning isn't the same, which we've all known forever, we've all been practicing forever, that students learn in different ways, that this is another way in which they can learn and they can be engaged. And so I'm really excited. I'm excited for your students. I'm excited for everyone's students for next year. Oh, Sean, what do you mean by this? You need to reframe what we're going through right now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Because I think people keep talking about this is learning, but this isn't. This is an emergency patch to get us through the rest of the year. So, most people were not trained in this. Most people had no experience in this. So the fact that anything is getting done is somewhat a small miracle, but it needs to be make sure that that the idea of distance learning isn't what we're doing right now. This is an emergency to get us through the rest of the school year. So I'm worried that people will take what they're doing now as distant learning and saying, well, it didn't work for my kid. Well, this wasn't exactly structured the way it's supposed to be. So I think there needs to be some sort of understanding and expectations that need to be managed on that.
And Sean, I think to that point too, like that's part of the advocacy, right? to like be the person who's like, no, this isn't what distance learning looks like. This wasn't designed to be distance learning. So thank you. I think we're gonna wrap up because it's almost 8:30. I could talk to you guys forever.
It actually is 8:30. So Lauren, thank you so much. You've had such a wealth of experience working in Title I high schools with students from an urban center who don't have the access, and being an advocate for those students, and then currently working in a community college setting and kind of seeing that work that you've done play out in both situations. I'm really appreciative that you are here tonight sharing that perspective and also being an advocate. And if everyone can take one thing from tonight's webinar, it's that we need to be advocates. Like, that's our number one thing as teachers, that we are advocating for our students as learners, and our students as humans in this world. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Lauren, thank you for being here.
Thank you. This is great. And I'm excited to scroll through the chat.